Welcome back to the I Am More Than podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Wessel, a former Miss Arizona USA professional model and founder of More Than Inc. I've known this week's guest since middle school, and I have no doubt you'll be just as fascinated with her story as I am. She's a strong, independent woman, a talented photographer and writer who also happens to be a military spouse. Shortly after their wedding, she embraced this adventurous lifestyle as her husband was stationed overseas. Once they arrived to England, he was deployed for 6 months, and during that time, Jenna fought through self-doubt and solo traveled to the most beautiful destinations in the world. We chat all about coping with anxiety while continuing to push yourself, tips for traveling alone, and what life has been like being married to a captain and an F-35 instructor pilot. Her journey is truly remarkable and so different than anyone else we've had on this show. You'll be glued to this episode from start to finish, so go grab yourself a glass of wine and please welcome my dear friend, Jenna McCone.
We go way back.
We go way back.
Yeah.
And I'm also a very curious person, so I probably ask a little bit too many questions.
That's such a good quality. Keep that up. This is why you're so good at what you do.
Thank you. That's why podcasts are 45 minutes to an hour long. Sorry, yes. Guys. So we were talking about once you went to college and just your experience through that, and then you met your wonderful husband. Can you tell me a little bit about how you guys met and what his career field was going to be?
Yeah, so actually ended up getting Tinder, that cool little app that no one's ever heard of. And Tinder was kind of going around and really taking off in college towns at that time. It was 2013. And so everyone had it. It wasn't like one of those like strictly hookup apps nowadays, It's like everyone was like checking it out and seeing what Tinder was all about. Yeah. And so Ryan, who is my husband, went to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, which is actually 10 minutes away from Monument, where Jordan and I grew up.
Full circle.
Yeah, full circle there. So literally 10 minutes from my house. I ended up swiping right. And he had already swiped right on me. And we talked for about 2.5 or 3 months before we actually met in person. So we got to really know each other just via text, which is just such a crazy, like, millennial thing to do. But, kind of got to know each other, the ins and outs, our upbringing, where we were from and everything. And by the time we met, things were pretty easy. They clicked. So we met in person in Vail. I was out there with my family and he was skiing. He's a skier and I'm a snowboarder. And he was actually the captain of the freestyle ski team at the Air Force Academy.
Of course he was.
So he had a bunch of his teammates there. And so we met up at a Sublime concert. There was a free concert going on in Vail. And then the rest is history, pretty much. We kind of started out as a long distance relationship and it stayed that way until we really moved in together, which is pretty crazy. I mean, long distance, we're talking, it started the 2-hour drive, or what is it, hour 45 minutes. Ryan can tell you to the minute the drive between the Air Force Academy and CU Boulder was, because he came up every weekend. Because if anyone knows anything about the Air Force Academy, it is not a normal college experience. It is very strict, right? It's preparing you for the military, but in a very dramatic way, because there are other ways that people become officers in the Air Force or whatever branch. And the Air Force Academy is hands down one of the most grueling and strict ways to do it. So he didn't have a lot of fun. We'll put it that way. So I think he was grateful to meet someone at CU Boulder to kind of get away for the weekend.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So you knew once you guys got serious, once he proposed and you guys were planning a wedding, you kind of knew what your life was going to look like. Am I right?
A little bit. Yeah. Yes.
That's a loaded question.
I mean, I think I knew he wanted to go to be a pilot. I knew that about him. He's one of those annoying people that has always known what he's wanted to do his entire life and then did it. Whereas I'm sure you and I are like, I think tomorrow I want to be an interior designer. And so I knew he wanted the pilot slot. But there's so much we didn't know that we would later find out, and that's the military in a nutshell, is you think you know what you're getting into and you really don't. So he got the pilot slot. which I think happened his senior year, if I'm not mistaken. And then once he graduated from the Air Force Academy, he's a year ahead of me. So he actually took a year to do what they call casual status at the academy, where they just work like a department job at the Air Force Academy to wait for their pilot slot at pilot training. So it worked out because he did that for a year, stayed in Colorado Springs, and then I finished school at CU Boulder. So by the time he was done with his casual year, I was graduated from college. But we were still young. I think at that time, yeah, he was young for his class. So he was still 21 or just turned 22. And I was the same. And so he was going to go to pilot training then, which was in the beautiful Columbus, Mississippi. If you've ever been, don't. And I was going to work. We weren't ready to make any moves yet. A lot of people do, which I'll talk about, but we weren't ready to make any commitments yet. So we did a year and a half actual long distance. So wow. He went to pilot training, which is an extremely, extremely demanding process and a ton of really intense training. And I worked at PepsiCo at the time. I worked at corporate in Denver and kind of and we said, hey, if we can get through this long distance, we can get through anything, which was technically correct. But, that was just the first of what the military would bring of many challenges. So in pilot training, everyone flies the same jet at first, and then everyone learns in that. And then there comes a point halfway through where you track either fighter jets or cargo heavy planes. So the cargo heavy planes are, those big Air Force planes you see. And then the fighter jets are,
like
the
tiny.
Right. The fast and loud. Yeah, exactly. Tiny is good. I should tell Ryan you said tiny.
Please don't. Ryan, don't listen.
No, but it's, so he tracked fighter jets, which is, it's a big deal, Yeah. First of all, I want to caveat and put a disclaimer that my experience as an Air Force officer spouse is so different. And not only that, as an Air Force fighter pilot spouse, I mean, not only is each experience different within the different branches, Navy, Army, Marines, but also within rank, within job, and then even within the pilot community, the different types of planes have totally different communities. So I just want to just put a little disclaimer in there that this is just my experience and the fighter, as an Air Force fighter pilot spouse, which is very specific. Anyways, it was a big deal tracking that. It was literally his dream happening in real time. And it was a huge deal for him. So he ends up getting the assignment to fly the F-15C, which is an air-to-air fighter. And the training was in Oregon, Southern Oregon, in the middle of nowhere, Oregon, a place called Klamath Falls. And you want to talk about small towns again. That's one of them as well. So I end up moving on from my job. And then that's when I moved in with him, we moved to Oregon together. And that was just a 9-month training. So we even had a roommate during that time. Like, it was so not normal. Like, it wasn't, married life happening right away. We loved our roommate, by the way. Shout out to B-Max. But we got married during that time, during that training process. So, and that is because we knew we were going to go overseas. And, it's a little easier stateside, but essentially the Air Force, and I think majority of the military, does not pay for any of your moving costs, your visa, anything if you are not married. So if you are, quote unquote, just a girlfriend or just a boyfriend, they're not going to take care of you at all. Like, if you're on your own. And so an overseas move is already super grueling and difficult. So a lot of people actually opt for doing the paper marriage first. So I actually don't know not one of my military spouse friends didn't get paper married first before their actual marriage. And it's solely because you have to, there are some logistics going around, So some people do it a year in advance and no one knows about it, and it's really just so that when or if they deploy overseas, we get the communication for it. we've got to fill out wills, we've got to fill out powers of attorney. And if you're not married to that person, and again, it's so much more difficult. Yeah. So we knew we were going to get married anyways. So we ended up getting engaged. We were 24 when we got married, which at the time, yeah, at the time, it just felt like, okay, we did everything, right? We went to college, we graduated college, we did the long distance for a year and a half. Like, we're good to go. Yeah. And we're 28 now, like pushing our 30s, and we're like, oh my God, we were so young. And it really isn't compared to a lot of military spouses. I don't know how much you know about the military, but there's a lot of things that people pick up, here and there. And one of them is that military couples tend to get married very young.
Yeah, my cousin just got married and they were, 21.
Yeah.
Young.
It's so young.
And that's very normal.
It is normal within the community, I think, and it's for that reason a lot of times. It's, hey, if you want to be with your spouse, either you get married or you're on your own and take care of yourself. And I actually had a friend who was stubborn. I love her, but she was like, I'm getting married on my terms. I'm not getting married on the Air Force's terms. And totally, that's what we all wanted. And she did it. She actually did the full move on her own and did the visa process on her own in England. And it was just, she can tell you how much of a hell that was. And she did it. It's possible. But I think that a lot of people don't want that. Already, again, moving overseas is so tough that they don't want that. And if they think they're going to be with this person, let's expedite the process. We got it,
Totally.
So
you guys get married. You know you're moving to Europe. Is that because how far in advance did you know that that's where he was going to be stationed?
We find out about next assignments usually 6 months before we move.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a pretty quick turnaround.
Yeah. And to move your life overseas.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
The particular jet he was flying at the time was, it only did 2 assignments. And they were both overseas, and one was at Kadena Air Base, which is in Okinawa, Japan. And it's this little island about 300 miles south of mainland Japan. It's in the middle of the Pacific. And then the other option was RAF Lakenheath, which is where we ended up going, which is about 40 minutes outside Cambridge, England, which,
gorgeous.
I'm sure the people that went to Okinawa loved it. And I actually know they loved it because I know a lot of people that went there, but man, I could not trade that assignment for anything. But yeah, we actually didn't know which one we were going to go to until 6 months before. And in fact, it was a random draw.
Oh my God. How much anxiety that induces.
I think I was on my way to my bachelorette party when I found out. I was on the plane, and he's like, hey, we're going to England. Well, shit, let's go.
Cool.
I thought I was going to Japan this whole time, You kind of just you try to prepare, but so much you just can't prepare for it. And I think that's what the military has taught me a lot about.
Well, you guys are newlyweds, and I'm not married, but from what I understand, that's a big phase in any relationship to begin with. That's where all the exciting stuff happens, but not when you have the pressure of moving overseas and starting a whole new chapter. How did you guys balance that whole phase in your life?
Yeah, it's a good question. We really just took advantage of being stationed overseas. And I think that seems like a given, but I think a lot of people miss the boat on that for various reasons. But we hit the ground running with travel. We landed there and we were living in temporary living. We had nowhere to live yet. And we were like, all right, mapping out, where can we go? Oh my gosh, we can take a train to Paris, and it takes 4 hours to get there from here. It's, wow. It was, so that really put a lot of fun into our newlywed phase. We had a blast, but don't get me wrong, the stress and the adjustment of living overseas was substantial. Yeah. I got a degree. I worked. I had, 2 years of experience under my belt. And then I moved to this job, and all of a sudden he's super busy and I'm at home twiddling my thumbs, wondering what the hell am I going to do? A lot. Any military spouse will tell you this. The unemployment rate for military spouses is crazy, even though a lot of them are educated. A lot of them have bachelor's degrees and a ton of experience, but people don't want to employ military spouses because they know they're going to move. And so, and especially overseas, you can do it. And I'll talk about this too. But I ended up adjusting and doing a lot of freelance work over there. So having kind of a thing that was mine and sacredly mine and that independence was super key to the health of our relationship as well, because he was so busy and I didn't have kids, I didn't have a dog, I didn't have anything. It was just myself at home. And so really tapping into some passions that I had kind of left behind throughout college and even right after college, like photography and like writing and things like that. So really reigniting that and kind of utilizing that was super good for me. And then also, like I said, our relationship. But it was tough. Every move we make is tough. I mean, even this move back to Phoenix was very hard on us, not to mention we were moving in the middle of a pandemic, but
yeah, that adds a little
bit
extra something to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, in the middle of an election as well. So that was
that's fun.
So yeah.
It's about you and I reconnecting through social media, and as I'm following your journey over there, and you're traveling all over the place, your photography, you're so talented, your writing is beautiful, so obviously I'm over here thinking like, homegirl's having the time of her life. She's the most independent, badass girl ever. And then when we were talking again, I just remember saying something to you about how I'm just such an anxious person that traveling by myself, like the thought of it brings anxiety to me.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember you being like, girl, I have anxiety. Like,
oh, do I?
I did it. And I think that's really cool because so many people can look at somebody else and be like, she's so brave, I could never do that.
Yeah. Oh,
and I think you can't do it until you realize you can't.
100%.
So I was like through that.
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I think it's worth talking about that my husband ended up deploying during this assignment when we were at Lake and Heath. So his plane at the time, they hadn't deployed combat since 2002. So this was a big deal. Wow. He mostly just did air-to-air policing, which is basically guarding NATO's borders. So they would go on what we call TDYs, was just basically just a temporary non-combat deployment kind of. And it's basically a work trip, and they'd be gone 2 weeks to a month somewhere awesome in Europe. Honestly, they did Iceland and that was his like normal work trip. But January 2019, they got a call and said, hey, something's going down. We need you in here. And they did a brief, and he comes home from that brief and says, I'm leaving in a week, and I don't know where to or for how long, but it could be anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And we kind of went like, I mean, anyone who's a military spouse and has someone in combat, this is a pretty familiar story, but I think it was the extra shock that his jet didn't deploy. It never did. So this was a big deal. So once we got that call, obviously there's no choice in that.
I was going to say, you can't turn it down.
No, I think it under very special circumstances, like if if your wife is having a complicated pregnancy or, something like that, it's got to be a pretty big deal. So no opting out of that. And I think he came home on like January 5th or something, and he left like January 12th or mid-January.
How do you even mentally prepare yourself for that?
Oh, you can't.
Yeah, I don't know how you would.
And listen, I'm here without any kids, and there were women in my squadron that had a 2-week-old infant, and so I can't say that my position was hard. Well, it was hard, but there were different types of hard. We'll just put it at that. And so no, you can't mentally prepare. But I, at that time, had formed some pretty solid friendships with some fellow military spouses that were around my age, had similar outlooks on the military, are very independent women who, have a job, have similar passions. And I really clung to them. And it was a little tough too, because those same friendships, because they were in different squadrons, their spouses weren't deploying at the same time Ryan was. So their spouses were home. So I was always hard. 3rd, 5th, 7th wheeling, which I'm fine with. But so you can't mentally prepare. So I immediately started therapy, pretty much. Because I was like, it was more preventative. We had a couples therapist, which, by the way, I recommend to anyone, even if you don't have issues that you need to address, just always having a couples therapist to call is key. We always have one.
Yep.
So I worked with her individually. Speaking of therapy, like I've been seeing a therapist kind of on and off, but I've always had one ever since I graduated college. I think those were some big steps that I took towards my mental health, because I was in a very, very, I don't want to describe it as a dark place, because I don't necessarily deal with depression as much as I do with like crippling OCD and anxiety. So getting therapy for me and getting help in that way, it's not foreign anymore. And again, like the more you do it, the more normal it becomes. It's
Absolutely.
quite literally like having your GP on doc, and your doctor. Just like when you have a weird lump or something, you call your doctor. If you are having a weird phase, you call your therapist, and it is the best
investment you could ever do for your health.
Yeah, and I think it's I'm loving that it's becoming more normal these days.
Yeah, me too.
So I normalized that for myself. So I had worked a lot on like what really helps me with anxiety. I think a lot of people give in, and sometimes it's necessary to do so and take a few steps back and reset. But I think my favorite quote that I kind of just remind myself of, especially in instances of traveling alone, and is, sometimes the fear doesn't subside, and sometimes you just have to do it afraid. And I think that's my favorite sentiment to go off of, because that's exactly what happened when I went to Hallstatt, Austria, which is this beautiful little fairy tale town in the Austrian Lake District. I had wanted to do it, and before we knew about the deployment, we had an entire travel bucket list, and I looked at that travel bucket list and I went, I don't need Ryan for this. I can just do it, you know? And if people want to come with me, that's great. But if people don't want to come with me and this is still on my list, I have to go. I mean, I cannot waste this. Yeah, it wasn't easy. When I left to travel, and I had traveled like alone to like go for a job or to meet someone, I never had a problem with that. But this was the first time that I embarked with the intention of being alone and doing the entire thing alone. And I just kept repeating that in my head as like, it's okay to do it afraid, but just do it. And just like you said, you cannot know if you can do it until you do it. And you look back and you're like, damn, I freaking did it. And it's never like perfect. Like it wasn't this like, groundbreaking experience where I had all these epiphanies and all that. But I landed in Munich. I took a 2-hour train into Salzburg. And then I got into Salzburg and I was supposed to rent a car because it was another hour and a half. And the car place was closed. And I went, all right, here's my first challenge. But then I didn't realize, most people speak English in Western Europe, but not a lot of people spoke English that day for some reason. Then I started to panic and I went, oh boy, here it goes. Like this is the challenge that people talk about. So I ended up taking a bus, and then they only took cash and I didn't have any cash on me. And then I started panicking. And then all of a sudden this old Austrian man, they speak German in that part, walks up and he just slides a couple coins in and pays for me, and then just continues and just goes and sits down. And he didn't speak English. It was in that moment that I realized, like, I'm actually not alone. That's the best part about solo travel, is you realize that you're not alone. I mean, there are so many good people in the world, and there's so much universal language. He literally didn't say anything. He just took care of my bus ticket and he just sat down. And after that, the trip really just started to ease. I mean, I just asked for help when I needed it. And there was always someone willing to do so. And I think the beautiful thing about solo travel is you're so much more present and you're really taking everything in. When you're with a big group of people, you're distracted by that group. But the combination of being alone and then taking photos, which I love to do, really brings you into the present moment, and you can really just like use all 5 of your senses and just enjoy being there. And actually, I remember sitting at this little cafe into my day trip at Hallstatt, and then looking around, and there were 3 other female solo travelers just sitting in the same spot. And it was just really empowering to get that done. And the next day I completed an 11-mile hike. I didn't think it was going to be 11 miles, but it was, just around one of the lakes, and it was really beautiful. And I stayed at a B&B, which was run by an older Austrian couple, and they made dinner for me, and we sat down, we had wine together. I mean, they were literally my grandparents for the weekend. It was a really awesome experience. And so oh gosh, until when it's safe to travel again, make an intentional solo trip. I think it's so important for growth and appreciation for a different place. So yeah, I really think that doing something anyway, even though I'm afraid, is huge. Taking the necessary precautions and steps. Obviously, there's logistics that go into it. Have backup plans. Have, your location turned on. I think I wrote a blog post, so it's pretty old, but it was kind of just logistical tips on solo travel. Realizing that you can do it and then do it again and then do it again. And it's quite literally exposure therapy, right?
Yeah. Does it get easier?
It does. It does to an extent, but there's always new challenges. I think the best thing is to not have expectations. I think expectations are a fun ruiner most of the time, especially in travel. So if it's a shitty time and you just had a bad trip, it wasn't worthless. It wasn't a waste of time. Yeah. You just take that and go, okay, like, that's fine. That was an experience. It was an experience. And I think that's what you need, good and bad. Don't expect to have such magical time every time, because that's just not the reality of travel in general, especially with solo travel. Again, like, I was panicking, absolutely full-blown panic attacks that night. And then the next day it turned around. And usually that's what happens, is there's a mix of good and bad. It's not just one really bad trip or one really amazing trip. There's so much that goes behind the scenes. Yeah. And so when you're looking at my Instagram, and this is something that I try to talk about a lot, especially when I was traveling, is like, there's so much non-glamorous parts of travel. Totally. So I wanted to kind of make that known. But it's always worth it. Always, even if it's a bad trip.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, like you said, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, and you seized it, which I think I have so much respect for you for doing that. And then your husband comes back safely, which I'm sure that adds another level of anxiety, because can you speak to him throughout the entire time? Do you know where he is?
Yeah, so we do know where he is, and it didn't happen until he was there that he could kind of tell us, or it was right before, I don't remember. And but we couldn't tell family where they were, and we could talk to them. Thank God for modern technology. I mean, I just think about my mom, who was a military spouse, an army spouse, when my dad was at Desert Storm, and they had literally letters. And I mean, and maybe some like landline phone calls here and there, but so thank God for technology that, yes, they had Wi-Fi, and we did talk every day, most days. And of course, there is a lot of unknowns and a lot of uncertainty every single day when you know his schedule and you know that he's flying in combat and it's a 9-hour flight. And I can't speak for how every other pilot spouse handles a combat deployment. For me, I'm so grateful that Ryan is in the air, especially in these days. Obviously, back in the days where like Korean War was happening, there was actual air-to-air fights. That has not happened in a long time. And so I really feel for the spouses who have people on the ground, And so I always try to remind myself of that, have a lot of faith in their training. I mean, their training is so extensive. I mean, there's a reason why it's named the best Air Force in the world, so I always try to remind myself of that. But of course there's anxiety and uncertainty, and of course there's horror stories. I mean, we had a death in our squadron just a few months before we left in a training accident, and he crashed in the North Sea. And those are the sobering moments, because I think that I can ramble on a lot about how it is just a job, this Ryan's time in the Air Force is temporary. It's not a part of our identity, which I stand by, but at the same time, it's not just a job, because it is service of country. Ultimately, it is risking, having an extra risk versus an accountant, you know what I mean? Like there is, and I always try to tell myself too, perspective. I mean, there's still a likelihood of a car crash on the way to work. Life is so uncertain, but being in the military and the nature of being and of his job and a lot of other jobs in the military is there's an extra risk that we both have to take, that we both have to realize that is the reality. And when you are filling out wills before his deployment, and when you are, talking about death in a way that most people don't, those are sobering moments. They really are.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, it is the best feeling when they come home.
Oh,
I mean,
I'm sure
everyone says it's better than the wedding day, and I 100% agree. I mean, it's just, 6 months without without your partner, and there are spouses that do it for longer. It's a long time, and you have to have some sort of a sense of independence and something that brings you joy during that time, because it's super necessary.
Well, it sounds in a sense that you both are in the military. You both signed up for service because you have to sacrifice a lot as well.
I won't undermine that there is sacrifice on my end. I certainly am not the service member, but I always laugh when people are like, well, thank you for your service. I'm like, no, but thank you for thinking of me. But yeah, there is a degree of sacrifice. But I think too, Ryan and I at least try to make our partnership as equal as possible. There are, of course, unfortunate things that just are non-negotiable. His career does come first for the next several years. I mean, he's likely doing a 10-year minimum. Some people stay in for 20, longer. But at least for the next several years, he can't choose where he goes. He can have some input, but ultimately we go where the Air Force sends us, and my career and my aspirations and passions come second. And that sucks. And there is sacrifice in that.
Yeah.
But within the things we can control, we make sure that there's equal partnership, and that is non-negotiable. I mean, something as simple as we do our own laundry. If I cook, you clean, vice versa.
Yep.
If there are voluntary trips and you can choose whether or not you go. We have a sit-down conversation and say, is this going to help your career anyway? Well, no, I already did this one. Okay, no, the next person can do it. And I think that his respect for that has made it work so much more, because I've seen a lot of couples and spouses put their needs and wants completely aside and take care of everything at home, to the point where they joke about, their husband being a third child or something like that. And I'm like, homegirl or homeboy, there are some stay-at-home dads there. No, you have, within the things you can control, you have to demand an equal partnership. And that's something that Ryan's been so good at. It's something my mother and my parents both were so adamant about. For those who don't know, my mother was also a military spouse, also a retired Air Force herself, but my dad was in the Army for 15 years.
Wow.
And they married young. She was 22. My dad was 24. But they didn't have me till she was 31. So they waited a really long time. She made sure to get her education and to have a career and to have something she loved and that was hers. And my dad always respected that. And I think ultimately Ryan's Air Force career would look a lot different if I wasn't in the picture. I mean, he really could go all the way. I mean, he could become a general if he wanted to. But the nature of being married means that you have those discussions. Yep. And just because they're a service member, does not mean that your dreams and whatever you want to do with your life go out the window. So I think that that's important to note that that distinction. It's all about balance.
Yeah.
And so that's what really has made us work. And again, we don't have kids yet, and I don't know, that's something that isn't in the near future, at least for now. But so I can't really speak to that end, but I think knowing me and knowing my mom and how she raised me, your girl is not going to be at home doing all the damn work just because you're flying, and it is going to, it's partnership. This is what we signed up for together. But obviously picking and choosing, there are things that he has to do and that I have to be there in full support of that. The deployment was one of them. So it's about finding that balance. That balance is really important.
And how do you find your own identity while things are constantly changing?
Yeah, I mean, at first, for the longest time, I thought that having my own identity meant having my own career. And I think that's an aspect of it. But when I didn't have a full-blown career work in England, and part of it was by choice, we knew that we were going to be there only a temporary time. And so we wanted the flexibility to travel. Having identity is having something that is your own. It's not your child's, it's not your husband's, it's yours. And whether that means running or yoga or painting or photography or writing, knitting, anything that is yours, I think is key to establishing that independence. And obviously it's great if you can get a career. And now that more jobs are going remote anyway, that's becoming a lot more accessible for military spouses. But if it's not a career, it's just got to be something. And so that was really important for me is finding that identity outside of his job, especially in the fighter pilot spouse community. There's so much pride, and I'm so about it. I love pride for what they do. What they do is very unique and it deserves a lot of praise. It's unlike any other job in the world. But I think, again, with that balance, people teeter on the line of like, their entire house is now aviation themed. I walk into a house and there's pictures of planes everywhere. And I'm like, do you like planes? Are you just like, if you're an aviation nerd too, like totally get it. But I think a lot of people, it's so easy to get sucked into when you don't have something of your own. Yes, service of country, and I've talked about this, but it ultimately is a temporary career of his, For example, he didn't wear his mess dress blues for our wedding. I don't know if you've seen some military weddings where they wear their like formal, their formal dress. And actually that was his choice. It wasn't mine, but his reasoning was that he didn't want his career to be intertwined with a marriage that was happening. I mean, it was Ryan's choice to be like, no, this is separate. And so that kind of set the bar for how we approached his career and his job. Yeah. And honestly, that's why I'm not that great of a military spouse when it comes to like, being super active in the community and like, there are key spouses that are basically like the squadron spouse leader. And, I didn't go to all the get-togethers. And I think that maybe there was a little bit of judgment for that, maybe not. But part of it was having, just having something going, for him as well. He didn't go to every squadron event because we were traveling together or because we had something to do that weekend. And yeah, I think achieving that balance. And
is there a lot of pressure and judgment that you feel from other military spouses that you've been surrounded by, or is there an outside pressure that you should be doing something on a certain timeline?
I wouldn't say there's overt judgment or overt pressure definitely not pressure. I would maybe some passive judgment of, like I said, not being as involved as I could be. But a lot of it came down to relatability. I mean, some of my best friends are military spouses, but it was ultimately because we had so much more in common than just being a military spouse. I mean, our relationships went so much deeper than that. We valued the same things. We had similar aspirations and we treated our marriages the same. That sense of independence, that sense of partnership. For me, relatability came down to, really just not having kids. So many military spouses have children, multiple children, and I am not in that phase of my life yet. And a lot of women are so into the motherhood, and talking about their kids and breastfeeding and what are you doing for your son? Well, here's what I'm doing for my daughter. And that's all fine. I don't want to rip on that. But I can't relate to that. So maybe there is some passive judgment of like, oh, well, she's never here. Or maybe she thinks she's too good for this community. I would hope not, but maybe a little bit of that. Also, I think, and this isn't necessarily related, but I just want to put a caveat, and we need to get so much better, and this is not just for military spouses, we need to get so much better at the kid question.
Can we dive into that?
First of all, we need to normalize couples just not wanting kids.
Yep.
But also, there are so many other factors. And women, especially should know this with pregnancy difficulties. And if you're asking about kids, for God's sake, do not ask when are you having kids, because I think that is so triggering for a lot of people, especially if they are prone to miscarriages, or there's infertility, or they just don't want kids. Maybe there was a little bit of alienation, with just not being a mother. And so I kind of found my non-mother friends, to be honest. We were just in a different phase in life. I think that we need to normalize not having children right away, or maybe, you just don't know the person's experience.
And there's such a structured timeline. And I think that goes for military spouses. That goes for everybody. There's this timeline that if you see something that's been going on for a certain amount of time, then you're like, obviously your next step. Like if you've been dating for a while, obviously you're getting engaged. Obviously you need to get married. Now you're having kids. Now you're buying a house. Now you're doing all these things, which, a lot of people choose to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that route. But there's also a lot of people that are kind of choosing their own unique path. Yep. And I don't think that is respected in the same way. And I think that they're equally unique. Yeah. Every story is different.
Yeah.
And I also think that not just women, everybody's gotten so comfortable to labeling themselves as like one thing. Mm-hmm. Like you could introduce yourself as a military spouse, but that's discrediting everything else. You're so multifaceted. You're so much more than.
Yes.
Same with a mom. Yes. Like I feel like so many moms, when they start to have kids, or when they're trying to have kids, or they have a few kids, it's like the attention is only on the kid. And it's never like, hey, how are you like separate from all of this? Yes. And I think all of that needs to be considered and normalized and talked about and discussed and welcomed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because as of right now, you're not supposed to talk about anything else. You should be proud that you're a military spouse. Why are you talking about your thing?
Right.
Or
you should be grateful to be a mother. Or, Yeah, I 100% agree. And my mom was so good with that. I mean, I don't think she was, I don't think they knew if they even wanted kids or not. And then I just kind of happened. But for her, she was a better mother when she could turn to something and that was hers. And then she could, talk about the difficult times of being a mother and just having that space to do so. And listen, if your purpose and your genuinely brings you joy is to be a stay-at-home mom and take care of your children, like more power to you. I think that's amazing. But I think what I just see a lot is like tired mothers and spouses who need a damn break, and either their spouse is not stepping up to the plate to help, or inability to kind of ask for help.
Because it's almost shown as like a sign of weakness if you need help.
Or you're not a good mother or something like that. And so I think that those two things are huge. For the spouse thing especially, just setting expectations, and within the military, choosing the things that are voluntary and asking your family what's best for the family. You're not a frat boy anymore. You don't have to stay at the bar super late at night every single time, pick and choose. And it still is important to me to get through this military lifestyle, which is so...
And also just being a very independent woman and being able to not only speak your mind, stand up for yourself. And like we had kind of talked about, just not really having a voice, not standing up for yourself throughout growing up. Oh my gosh, that now I think it kind of creates the opposite when you do become an adult, because you're like, no, I know what it feels like to like hold it in. I'm not doing that anymore. Like I gotta talk about it.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's also something that needs to be normalized, because women should be able to express how they feel, their opinions, what they want, and not be looked at as bitchy, needy.
Totally.
And any of the above. So I think that independence is actually a superpower.
Yeah, absolutely. And also a great thing that's happening within the military too, is there are female pilots with male spouses that are not in the military. And I think that's so important to have, because it's switching the narrative, it's switching the roles, and seeing how that plays out, and to have that diversity and to have that in the Air Force is huge, because we need to also normalize men doing some work and holding up the household and
helping with the kids or taking care of the kids primarily.
Yes. The other squadron at our base had a female commander, and then her husband was also a commander in the other squadron, and they were just an absolute power couple. But like literally she would deploy for 6 months and then come home, and then he would deploy for 6 months, and they had kids. I mean, it was obviously it's so difficult, but to see that is so empowering. It's so cool to just watch this couple, this absolute power couple, live out both of their dreams and raise a child and do it all, you know, and it is possible. It comes down to partnership and valuing each person as equal.
Definitely. Yeah. So then you guys get notified that you are going to Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yeah, well, the base is really
in Luke.
Luke, which is West Phoenix. But yeah.
But that's a big move coming from Europe, and you guys are here for how many years?
At least 3, yeah. And it's another one of those things that either we find out we stay here for another 3, and then that will finish out his commitment, or we go somewhere else. And right now the options are Salt Lake City or Fairbanks, Alaska. Oh, and then actually the new base for the F-35, my husband, for those who don't know, switched over to the new shiny F-35 jet, so he'll be an instructor here. That's why we moved here. There's the base is opening at RAF Lakenheath in Cambridge, where we were. So we could very much end up back there, which is exciting. And
that's honestly, super exciting.
I actually really love moving every 3 years right now. I think that'll probably get old, and that's why we're getting out, or at least I say we. Sorry, I say we're getting out.
Well, you guys are a unit.
Yeah, right. But Ryan's getting out at 10, at least that's the plan, and then probably going to fly for the airlines if all goes well. But for now, we really love to just like have that adventure and to experience those new places that we talked about, which is so important. But yeah, we're loving it so far.
I love it.
And again, there's so many ups and downs.
Yeah.
But I think my parents, really prepped me for the military life in their way and made it really fun and exciting, because I was born abroad. My parents lived all over the world through the military. So it's a really special lifestyle, and I'm grateful for the opportunities that it has given. Now, there are so many other really bad assignments in the military, so we've been very lucky. I don't want to, if there's any people that are going to be military spouses out there, you don't always get
what you want.
Or get what you want. Let alone, like, granted, we had to live in Columbus, Mississippi, or, I lived there for a little bit before we moved to Klamath Falls, Oregon, which is another podunk town in Southern Oregon. So, you win some, you lose some.
Basically, that's life. I told you guys we're going to love her. Isn't she so interesting?
No.
Well, I'll put all of her
information. So much for having me, though. I mean, literally, again, like, the guests you have been phenomenal. And I'm like, you had Miss USA on here, and here I am.
Everyone is unique and incredible with a very different background. Yeah. And I think it's cool because even if your story doesn't resonate with one person, it can resonate with 100 more.
Right.
So I think it's really cool to just get unique and diverse and amazing women that have experienced different things.
Yeah. And if there's any military spouses out there, hit me up. I can answer any questions. Again, my experience is very limited to so many different other experiences in the military, but
she's an open book, though.
Oh, yeah.
You should definitely DM her. Yeah. I'll put all your information in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers. Yeah. So there you have it. I hope you got just as much out of this episode as I did. Please take a second to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It helps us so much. And remember, you are more than whatever label's been placed upon you. We'll see you next week.